Ever wonder what it's really like working as a mining geologist? What's a day on the job actually look like? How much work is in the field versus on the computer? How much do you get paid? Well, today I am thrilled to welcome the amazing Jess Scanlan, a geological engineer turned mining geologist who now owns her own business, Mine Life Media, which is transforming how the mining industry connects with the world. But in today's video, we'll be talking about the over 5 years she spent working on site at an underground mine in Montana. Okay, so first off, thank you so much for coming on and agreeing to talk about your career in mining. So to begin with, I'll just have you introduce who you are, what your role was in mining geology, and who you worked for.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. It is so cool to be a part of this geology careers because I think there are so many careers in the geosciences that we don't get to explore on a daily basis. And so I'm super excited for this and the whole rest of the series. So thank you for having me. My name is Jess. I worked as a grade control geologist at an underground platinum palladium mine for 5 years. And I also interned there for 2 years. I have a degree in geological engineering with an option in mining, which is kind of like a minor. But I also have a minor in geophysics from Montana Tech. And I currently own my own business, but we are going to be talking mining today, and I'm super excited about it. I am not on site as much these days. I do just want to make that very clear. But I do still work in the mining industry and have a lot of cool opportunities within that.
Awesome. No, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I will be linking all of your amazing social media channels down below. It's so cool now that you run a business. But yeah, I'm also glad that you have such extensive experience in the mining industry. So first off, in very basic terms, what kind of work did you do in the mining industry? And maybe if you could walk us through a typical day or week for you when you were on the job.
Absolutely. Yeah, so like I mentioned, I was a grade control geologist. Now, there are a lot of careers for geoscientists within the mining industry. So what I did was I worked at a producing mine. So this was a mine that was actually in operation. They were creating the metals and materials that we use every day. And my job as a grade control geologist was essentially the steering wheel of the mine. So I would go down with the miners, work underground on the same shift as them, and I would tell them kind of which way to go if things were ore or waste. So ore is the stuff that has the good metal in it. Waste is we call it leave it right? You leave it right there. So I was mostly underground. I would say about 70% of my work was underground in the mine, and about 30% was office work. So, making maps, doing computer stuff, that kind of cool stuff. I did work shift work, so we worked about a 5 on, 5 off schedule, rotating days and nights. So you're essentially working half the year, which is really cool, especially I love to travel, so I got to travel a lot. And then, yeah, the rotating days and nights was not super fun, admittedly, but very cool opportunity. You got very close with the crew that you worked with.
Wow, that is so interesting. And the field versus the not field time breakdown and stuff, we'll get more into that later. But before we do that, what initially got you interested in mining to begin with? Was there a specific moment or experience that inspired you?
Yeah, absolutely. And people love this story because it's so embarrassing. So I went to school for geological engineering. I wanted to be a geologist, but my dad was like, cool, you're going to be an engineer. So that was the closest thing I could get to geological engineering. But there's only so many schools in the US that offer geological engineering as a degree. So I went and toured some, and I ended up going to Montana Tech. Now, if you've ever been to Butte, Montana, it's a big mining town. But I did not go into that degree expecting to go into mining at all. It wasn't even on my radar. So as part of our freshman year courses, we had to go through the different options. And like I said, these are kind of like minors. So we had mining, geotechnical, which is what you think of when you think of geological engineering, petroleum, which is like oil and gas, and hydrogeology, which is aquifers and natural water resources. So when we got to the mining portion of the option, we went underground to a mine on campus. So Montana Tech is one of the only schools in the US that has an underground mine on campus that students use. And it's terrifying. You're going into this hole in the ground that students are maintaining, and you're like, man, I hope this rock stays above my head. I'm a freshman. I have no clue how rock mechanics work at that point, right? So I'm terrified. I actually cried. thinking about this. I'm like, this is my last time here on Earth. Terrifying. Anyways, so I'm crying. I'm like we walked into this decline and it's pitch black. If you've ever been underground, I mean, caves and stuff are one thing, but underground in a mine, when there's no light except for what you have on your head, is one of the most amazing experiences you can have. You are one with the earth. You are standing where most people have never stood before. Now, obviously, this is a student mine. Lots of people have been there. But like, once I transitioned into my career, you were looking at rock that had never been seen by anyone else before. And it was your job to, I'm getting choked up here, to map and analyze and determine what that rock is doing. And you and a couple of miners, maybe some shifters, they see that rock and then boom, they blow it up, it's gone, right? So like, you are getting to see something that very few people in the world will ever see and stand where very few people in the world will ever stand. And it makes you feel like just part of the earth. And I would sit underground and turn my cap lamp off and sit in that darkness and just listen. And you can hear the rocks kind of moving. And it just reminds you that our earth is alive, right? And it's such a cool experience, and it's so hard to explain.
Oh my gosh, the way that you just explained that like gave me chills. That is insane. When you mentioned about like the pitch darkness, I know how like you said caverns, they're not the same at all because they're typically lighted. But I was in one recently where they turned them off for a second to show us how dark it is. And I was not prepared for that. And I imagine a mine is so even like crazier. And I remember thinking too, like you couldn't see anything. So it was like the sounds were heightened and you would just hear like the dripping, of the water on the limestone. And what is like a mine? Like, what does it sound like?
Yeah, so it really depends where you're at, right? So like, I would do this far away from any of the production spaces, and sound doesn't travel through rock very well. Who would have known, right? So, you'd sit there and like I said, you'd hear kind of like the rocks dribbling, or way off in the distance, if you could hear maybe some of the drills going, if they were like doing diamond drilling like core, or if they were bolting something, you would hear the machines. But you would also just hear like these cracks and pops, which kind of sounds scary. But really it's just the earth kind of settling into this new form, and if it gets too cracky and poppy, that's when you want to get out of there.
Oh my gosh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'd be out of there if I heard cracks and pops. But that sounds so cool. Oh my gosh. So I'm curious, what, other than just underground, which is already super cool, what's the coolest place you've gotten to go as a mining geologist?
Yeah, so I made the decision to not travel around a lot in my mining career, which I kind of regret, if I'm being honest. Within mining, there is so many cool opportunities to travel around the world. I have friends who have worked in Australia and Asia, and like they get to go all around these cool places. I have a partner, I have dogs. That just wasn't quite in the cards for me. But I definitely, if anyone is considering a career in mining, take those early years, take those opportunities as they come to travel, because there are so many cool places. My next goal is Alaska. I would like to work in Alaska. So if any Alaska companies are out there listening, let me know. Hit me up.
Some of the places that geologists get to go, as my parents were geologists, they worked in Alaska for 7 years. I mean, like, geologists get to go the coolest places. That is amazing. So earlier you mentioned the kind of breakdown of like field versus not field work, and you said like 70% in the field. So what does that other 30% look like for you as when you were a mining geologist?
Yeah, so I would go underground. So we work 12-hour shifts. So I would go around for, 8 hours-ish a day. And while we're down there, we're taking notes on, this mine was very old school. So we took notes in our notebooks, took face measurements, which is the rock that you're looking at. You have to measure how big and tall it is, measure the different rocks within that so you can do some geological mapping. It's very like 3D version of what most students are used to in field camp, right? So you look at the surface, we were looking at the rocks underneath the earth. So then what we would do is we would come up to the surface and we would translate all of that to maps. Now, again, very old school. We were using paper maps and colored pencils. So what you're learning in field camp is still very important and very relevant, even though technology is evolving. Most mines, as I was leaving, we were starting to get more advanced, I would say. So like now they have like LiDAR scanners. There's these cool things where you can like take a picture of the rocks and it'll like do this whole 3D map thing with it. So that saves a lot of surface work. But so we were translating all of that. It involved putting measurements and stuff into a computer. So you always want to know if you took any samples. You would take rocks and put them in a bag, and you'd put a label in the bag. You'd send that off to get analyzed to make sure that, you know, you have grade, which is how much of a particular commodity is within a rock. It's usually a percentage or ounces per ton or something like that. And that's how you know kind of how much metal you're getting out of the earth. So that has to go in the computer. Making new maps is really important, so using a lot of like AutoCAD and Vulkan. Sometimes you're talking to like the mine planners if there's any sort of, you know, safety things happening. So like, hey, we need more bolts, or this area kind of like faulted out, we need to move, that kind of stuff. It's a lot of coordination and translating things from underground to the computers.
The field stuff sounds so fun. I would love to just experience that for like one time just to see. So you've mentioned a few times like metals or ore deposits. So what were you actually mining for?
So the mine I worked at was platinum palladium. It's one of the only platinum palladium mines in the US, which is very cool and one of the reasons that I knew I wanted to work there. But of course, with mining, we often think of metals mining, so we think of copper and gold and all of that fun stuff. But I also just really want to put out there that mining is more than just metals. So there's like aggregate mining, coal, which is kind of like going away, but not also at the same time. So lots of different mining types. This is just one commodity experience.
That's awesome. I love that you highlight that there's so much diversity, because there's just so many more things you can do in mining geology and things you can mine for and reasons we need those things.
Yeah, but underground mining is still the coolest.
It sounds like it. I think you've already convinced me.
Okay. I mean, yeah, open pit's one thing, it's cool, but underground was way better.
So getting to probably something that's on a lot of people's minds that are watching this, mining often gets a lot of bad press. So how did your company balance mining with environmental protection and sustainability? And did you observe that, you know, these efforts were changing or increasing over the years?
Yeah, you know, and this is a question I get asked a lot. I'm what my neighbors consider like a hippie, right? I'm the person using the reusable bags at the grocery store and carry my own straw. So people are like, you worked in mining? What? Isn't it nasty? Isn't it dirty? Isn't it bad for the environment? And I will say that historically, yeah. And I think that's something that we in the industry, in the mining industry, have to recognize, is that there have been historical bad practices, both environmental, safety, etc. The industry has come a long way, and there's still so much room for learning and improvement. But I will say, for me, what made me choose this industry is I am a big believer is if you want to see change in something, you have to be a part of it. So when I see the perspectives of mining, or I see mining being done poorly in other places, especially outside the US, I'm like, okay, how can I be a part of this? What can I do within my job to do things better and be more appropriate? So I'm a huge believer in that. You know, you can talk about doing something all day long, but if you're actually there doing it, you can make a world of difference, even if it's just one operation, or like with my job now, I get to advocate for mines that are doing things right, which is so cool. But the mine that I worked at actually ran directly underneath a world-class fishing river. So this is a river that people like travel to go fly fishing on. And most people would never guess that there is literally a mine like 10 miles upstream. And our tunnels ran directly underneath it. So, you know, that's one thing that drew me to this is the mine that I worked at was known for doing things right. As they were getting established, they had this thing called a good neighbor agreement. And everybody in the mining industry thought they were crazy in the 80s when they were like doing this. They're like, you're working with your community, like just plop a mine there and call it good. But they really wanted to do things differently and work within the community. And we're still seeing the effects of that good neighbor agreement today. It's been recognized by the Initiative for Responsible Mining Association for doing things like having low carbon outputs and that kind of stuff. Tiffany's, like the world famous jeweler, actually used to buy their platinum and palladium directly from this mine because of their environmental and community initiatives. So there are mines out there that are doing it right. I will say for those watching, if you are considering mining as a career or anything like that, we are in a workforce crunch. And I think we hear that within a lot of the geoscience realms. So if you want to make a difference, look for investing your time, your expertise. You are the future workforce. So look for operations that match your values, because the operations that are doing it right, they're the ones that are going to get those workforce. And it's the same with investing monetarily as well. The more people invest their time and their money into operations that match their values, the more positive the industry will shift. That was really long. I'm sorry.
No, I loved every second of that. That was iconic. I love that you highlight the things your company did, the fact, the reasons you chose them, but also that to make change, you can't just ignore it, set that aside and live your life differently. It's still there. You can go into that and you can do something to help the change. And with that in mind, my follow-up question to that is, why do we need mining? We have this transition toward better mining practices, but is there ever a future where we could just do away with it? And if not, why not?
That is such a tough question. So I'm a big believer in the circular economy. So I fully believe that we can reduce our mining of some materials in the future if we ramp up recycling practices, make it more accessible. So like where I live, we don't have recycling, and I stack my paper and cans and stuff until I can go somewhere that does, right? So no, I'm a big believer in that. I think it's going to take a huge shift. It's not something I don't think we'll see in my lifetime. But one of our favorite sayings in the mining industry is, if it can't be grown, it must be mined. And I have a love-hate relationship with that saying. It kind of comes off as a little bit arrogant, but it's also true. There is nothing you do in your daily life that doesn't involve some sort of mined materials. These materials are necessary, and we're seeing a lot of increase in materials that are different than we've seen before, right? So way back in the day, lithium wasn't even a question. They're like, what the heck is lithium for? We're going to throw it out. But nowadays, it's it's a critical material for things like electric vehicles. Silver continues to be a critical mineral for solar panels. So I would argue that most materials that come out of mining are critical, because even things like aggregates, they don't get near enough recognition, but they are literally what our foundation of society is built on. So, there's lots of materials that we need. It's just, how do we do it responsibly in a way that we are comfortable with, in a way that doesn't have environmental impacts like it used to.
That's so well said. If we want to live the way we live with all of our technology and move forward with clean energy transition, we need those metals to put in those technologies to harness clean energy. But I also love that you mentioned the circular economy and the recycling, because we can do that with so many materials, especially those that we get from Earth. And so I think that's a great point as well. I think both of those are great points. And I don't think for students out there listening to this, I don't think mining's going anywhere anytime soon. It might be evolving and changing, but it's staying here, and you can be part of that change. So anyway, last question kind of in that vein is, are there any other misconceptions or myths about mining that you'd like to bust?
Oh man. So I think we've kind of already talked about this, but one thing I hear is all mining is bad. Like we were talking about earlier, it can be very black or white. You either love mining or you hate it. And I think there's so much gray area, and that's where I go back to recognize your values and invest either your time or your money into companies that are matching those values, and actually matching those values. I should say that's very important. Greenwashing is real for mining, for petroleum, for all sorts of industries. So actually dig into that and make sure that they're matching your values. Also, mining is stuck in the past. Is a big one that I hear a lot. A lot of people still picture Snow Wives and the Seven Dwarfs with their pickaxes. I do have to giggle because the mine I worked at, like I said, was very old school with the paper mapping. But not all mining is like that. I've been to operations within my current career that like have entire offices underground. Like they don't even have hardly anything on the surface. It's like their computers and their offices and stuff are underground. We have Wi-Fi underground. Like I can check my Instagram or upload a YouTube video, underground. So lots of new technology. I think we have like lots of cool remote automation. I have been dying to like drive a haul truck, but like now it's like the haul trucks drive themselves. So will I ever get that opportunity? I don't know. But so there's lots of technology happening, and every mine is different. So every single operation, we all know that geology isn't the same everywhere, right? It's very different, and how each operation, each company, each region handles their mining is very different. So I definitely recommend doing some due diligence and looking into what's happening near you, and is it meeting your values? And if not, what can you do about that?
Awesome. Okay, kind of switching gears now to a little bit about, your experience, but also what you think might help students that want to get into mining in the future or a similar career. This next question was really highly requested by many viewers. That is, what kind of education or training prepared you to be a mining geologist?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, my background, my degree is actually in engineering, not geology. I can't say if that was good or bad. I think it led me to a lot of opportunities. However, I know some of the questions were surrounding math. If you do not want to do as much math for engineering, I think a geology degree is just fine. Most of my coworkers were geologists without the engineering degree, and honestly, they knew a lot more than I did at a lot of times because they took very different classes. So I think that's really key is geoscience is going to get you into mining. It just may not get you into that engineering part. I do like having the engineering personally as like a fallback. I've worked as a civil engineer. I have opportunity to be a mine engineer. So if you're like really wanting to kind of have a lot of opportunities that might be outside just the geoscience realm, that's where that engineering comes from. But my main advice is for classes and kind of preparing is I took a victory lap in college. So I went a fifth year, and I only had like 2 classes in that fifth year that I had to finish to finish my degree. So I was able to take a lot of off-kilter classes. So I took like things like economics, geophysics. Like I said, I got that minor, some of the mining classes that I wasn't required to take. And by following my interest in that way, it really prepared me and it gave me a better rounding of my career. So I highly encourage you that if you have a spare course credit or something you need, or maybe you can fit an extra class in there, find something that's interesting to you and take it, whether it be some sort of like geology related class or maybe not. So that's kind of my advice on that. But I will say a lot of the mining from my experience is very hands-on. So you learn one thing in school and that's great and it gives you a solid background, but what it does is it teaches you to learn. So, once you get on site, they're going to wipe that all away anyways and teach you how to do things their way.
That was my very next question, is what's something you had to learn on the job that you didn't get prepared for in school? I know for me, exactly what you said. School taught me how to learn and how to teach myself and do that very efficiently and effectively. It was more of a how to do that than it was just learning or memorizing certain things. So what was something for you that you had to learn on the job?
Yeah, absolutely. Things are very different on paper than they are like in the real world, right? So my first, I want to say like month as an intern, I had these 2 minors and I was trying to do things. I'm like, man, you guys aren't following the profile. And so when we're in mining, we have this profile that we follow that follows the ore. Kind of looks like a lopsided oval almost. And so I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like, you have to do this. This is what the textbook says. And they're like, it won't do that. And I'm like, well, according to my rock mechanics, it will. And they fought me on it. And so finally I came in the next day and they had done it perfect. It was beautiful textbook example. And what they did is they made me stand up on this machine, and it's the machine that drills. It has these 2 arms, and it drills the holes. And they're like, okay, Jess. They're like, drill it out. I'm like, sure, whatever. Like, show me which buttons to push, and I'll drill it. And it turned out that the arms of the machine couldn't move how they mined it. So, like, we couldn't drill and we ended up having to, like, back up, take a chunk of the wall off. It was a whole ordeal. And so that was a very hard lesson learned. And I'm so grateful for the miners for teaching me that sometimes the reality of what's possible isn't what the textbook says is possible. So never go into something thinking you know more, especially with miners, because they've been at this a long time usually.
What a story. Oh my God, that's amazing. Okay, so what are some different roles or specialties that a geoscientist can pursue in this industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So many. I think that's one cool thing, not only about being like a geoscientist, but also working in mining is once you kind of have that geoscience or honestly any kind of science background, you can go so many places in the mining industry. And I truly believe that most of the mining industry is really open to this. So like I said, I worked in production. Now this is an operating mine that is producing metals, and that's great. But one of my favorite parts of the mining industry is exploration. And those are the people that are like out in helicopters, hiking around, picking up rocks. Like that's my dream job. So again, any exploration companies hiring, let me know. But I have lots of friends in it, and they get to go to the coolest places, and they spend like a week out in the field camping and flying around in helicopters, and I'm so jealous. But there's also environmental. So when I was starting to think about leaving my career underground, that was a route that I considered because there's a lot, again, of on-the-job training that you can do with environmental with that science background. So again, if you're really passionate about changing what a mine is doing, maybe an environmental section might be good for you. There's also safety. I know a lot of geologists that have gone the safety route, that they just want to make things better for the people on site and safer. So I think that's great. There is also a lot of data, especially now with technology advancing. A lot of geoscientists are going into these like data roles, like block modeling and planning and all of this cool stuff. Then a lot of ones that people don't think about are the supply side. So I get to currently work with a lot of geologists who are working either in sales, so like of equipment, of geological equipment, or support for like software support. So I mentioned like MapTech Vulcan earlier as part of the software things. They have to have geologists that are supporting the geologists on site. So if you want like remote work, if you have a family or something, you're like, I can't work on site, I can't work shift work, that might be a great route for you. You have my current route, which is marketing and PR and community relations and investor relations. So lots of different opportunities within the mining industry or just the geosciences in general.
I love that you highlight such a variety, and I also love that you mentioned these other pathways, because so many people think of geosciences as we just work in the field or we just get into, because that's what we mainly do, or you have to do that for some percentage of your job, but that's not always the case. You can choose a route that's fully on the computer or, you know, fully in the office or in the lab. It just depends on what route you want to go. And I know for me, I love going in the field, but most of my entire PhD was done in a lab. I never once stepped foot outside. That's why I'm so pale. But
I think that's so great to highlight for accessibility too. You know, I hear people who may have different accessible options, or like, man, I would love to be a geologist, but I never did because XYZ. And I'm like, there are so many options out there now that, yeah, it may not be the geologist that we picture, like the old school out in the field geologist, but there are still so many opportunities to learn. And geology is just learning about the earth around you, right? And so I think if that's something you're interested in, there's a route for you no matter what your kind of situation is.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned earlier, there's so much now that's done remotely as well. So there's a lot you can do kind of in the field from out of the field. All right, so the last couple things I want to ask before we get into viewer questions is, what was your least favorite part of the job and what was your favorite?
Oh, man. So obviously I left working underground for a reason, and there's lots of reasons that we won't get into, but I will say that the shift work is a lot. My relationship was suffering. There's, you know, some good and bads. Working night shift is really hard. Having to try and sleep through the day while your neighbors are mowing the lawn. You get really burnt out really fast. There also is this insane pressure. So working at the mine I was working at, we were working with very high-priced precious metal, critical mineral commodities. So like every decision you're making is $1 million decision. That's either gonna make $1 million or you're gonna lose $1 million. So there's a lot of pressure, which you learn to trust yourself and trust your schooling and your that kind of stuff, but still a lot of pressure. There is industry volatility, and I think that's so important to highlight. In mining, in natural gas, and in any natural resources industry, you're going to have these boom and bust cycles. So the mine that I was working at, we just had a major layoff of 700 people. And that's really affected our communities. So that's where the mining company's role in future-proofing communities is really important. And that's, again, where you're investing your time, your money into these companies comes into play, and making sure that they're doing the right thing by their communities by this. And I will admit that obviously being a female in a male-dominated environment, mining is very male-dominated, that had its own struggles that you had to learn how to navigate. But all of that being said, favorite. I loved my job, working at the mine. 3 years out of college, I was making over six figures, so it's a great job, great pay, great benefits. They helped us move when we moved back here. I did have a direct responsibility and decision making, so I had a direct impact on what was happening at the mine, not only for my own values, but also like knowing that you're contributing to something and that is solely your decision is really kind of cool, and I had a lot of pride in that. I got to work with so many people from so many different backgrounds. Mining, like I said, is a worldwide thing. So some of my miners were from like Poland, and I got to learn a lot of Polish cuss words, which was really cool. Maybe not for them, but for me it was. Being a part of these materials, so like we said, if it can't be ground, it must be mined. So like knowing that a piece of you is going into somebody's new knee, right? Like platinum and palladium is good for like medical things, or a car that's going to take someone to college. Like there's just so much coolness in that. Lots of variety in the work. No day was ever the same. And like I said, being underground, I really I felt this connection to the earth that you don't get to feel anywhere else.
Oh, that's amazing. I think my favorite thing you've mentioned is the experience being underground, especially your first experience. That was really, really cool. But also I love what you mentioned about just the relevance of what you do to people's everyday lives. I mean, so many people think mining is so far removed from societal relevance and everyday relevance, but it is so not. I mean, like everything I'm recording on right now, like this is all from Earth, and it's, you can just like, if you work in mining, you just walk down the street and look at somebody on their cell phone and be like, I did that.
Yeah. It's so cool. I have like little rings and stuff that are platinum and palladium. I'm like, cool, like little 0.1% of this, is probably something I did.
Oh my God. Oh, that's amazing. Okay, finally 2 viewer questions. So the first one I was gonna ask was, does a career in mining require math? You kind of mentioned for your degree, engineering was very, very math heavy. But if you go the geology route, which you can still graduate and go into mining with, less math required. So what about on the actual job? Was there a lot of math?
So, it's not like differential equations and stuff that I had to take as an engineer, right? Like we're not down there doing like limits and all of that weird stuff that I can't even remember these days. But there is a lot of what I consider like basic algebra, maybe in a Calc 1. So you're doing a lot of like mental calculations, like especially if you're working with the miners, they want to know how much rock they're taking for their contract, so they get paid on like a block basis. So if you're taking a face, a round that is like 8 foot wide by 8 foot deep by 10 foot tall, like what's that calculation? How, all of that cubic feet there. And a lot of just measurement type math. So if you're, measuring from a survey point to feet, how many feet is that? That kind of stuff. Nothing too intense math wise until you start getting up into those like higher levels of things like block modeling and stuff like that. Most of it's just basic multiplication and addition and subtraction.
That's not bad. Okay, and next one is very highly requested. Do you need a master's degree?
Such a good question, and I think you're going to get a different answer from so many different people in this. I have a lot of friends who have master's degrees. I have zero intention of getting a master's degree. So I will say that no, a master's degree is not required. I know a lot of people who are very high up who did not have master's degrees. Some of them didn't even have degrees in geology, right? They were engineers like me or something else. So not required, but I will say before you jump right into getting a master's, if you want to go in the mining industry, I would recommend going to work first. A lot of companies will support master's degrees. So they'll either reimburse you for classes, they'll pay up to a certain amount of credits, they'll pay for like different times, like if you have to go into class in person or have to go to the conference or something. So rather than like taking out a bunch of student loans and trying to get your master's degree right off the bat, go to work for a couple years, usually which for most companies, I've heard it's between 3 and 5 years if you work for them. They'll support you on that master's degree journey.
That's such a great point. I know a lot of people that like got into internships and then that turned into something more and then they funded their entire master's degree, which is super cool. And they don't have to like, be a teaching assistant or anything and use up their time because their company's paying for them to go to school. So that's a really great point and a wonderful starting place for someone if they wanted to go into that. So after a bachelor's degree in geology, if somebody wanted to pursue a career in mining, what should they specialize in for their master's?
That's a great question. So, like I said, I don't have any personal experience with this, but I'll tell you what a lot of my friends are doing. So a lot of them are getting MBAs. A lot of them want to go into the more corporate side of mining. So an MBA is crucial for that. You want to start getting higher up in the industry. That's definitely something you need to have. Some of them have gone for geology and then gone for masters in mining or geological engineering, kind of getting that engineering background. If you wanted to go the environmental route, but maybe you were having trouble getting kind of an environmental position, maybe some sort of environmental masters would be good for you. Hydro is always a good one. I think anything working with water is so important to our daily life, as with mining, as with minerals, but I think those are good options if you wanted to get a master's, but I think it really depends on your kind of career goals.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a feeling that a lot of these questions, the answer is it depends, but that just speaks to the variety of options out there. And that actually brings up one question, because you mentioned, engineering geology. Is there a difference? This was a viewer question, but also a me question because I don't know. Is there a difference between engineering geology and geological engineering?
I love this question. I had to Google it. I saw it pop up on like your YouTube thing, and I'm like, I honestly have no idea. So here's what Google says. So it says engineering geology is you study the environmental impact before and after engineering projects, assess soil and environmental problems. Geological engineering, which is what my degree is in, is more design, rock mechanics focused. So you're designing things like mines, like roadways, etc., based on geological studies. So geological engineering is you use geology knowledge for engineering problems, according to the Google.
That makes sense. Yeah, geological engineering is more engineering, and you use geology for that. And then engineering geology is more, well, kind of exactly what engineering the geology.
Exactly. Before I went into mining straight after school, I actually worked as a civil engineer. So my dad likes to tell people that geological engineers are just the civil engineers of the rock world. We work with rocks instead of concrete.
Yeah, that's so true. That's how I always saw it. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, next question. What type of instrumentation does a mining geologist use?
Yeah, am I allowed to say it depends again? How many times can I say that? So yeah, instrumentation is pretty basic. So it can vary from like the old school mine where I was at, where we just had like a Brunton compass and a notebook and a pen and some colored pencils, all the way up to these new school technology things where you're like carrying around a camera and a LiDAR scanner and doing like photogrammetry type stuff. So huge wide variety. Open pit varies versus underground. So yeah, wide variety there with instrumentation, but having a good old Brunton compass and knowing how to use it is crucial.
Completely. I imagine it depends is going to be a common theme for all of these interviews because everybody has very individual experience and there's so much diversity in this field. Again, one of the positives about it. So are you seeing any new careers in mining or geological engineering start to pop up?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think both mining and geology, and I mean, honestly, the whole world is evolving with these new technology things. And I think that's something that's so cool about it. So like we mentioned, a lot data science applications is really important. And honestly, I'm starting to see a lot of geology jobs pop up that say things like, oh, background in data preferred or data analytics or something, which is really cool. There's also a lot of, like I said, automation and remote operations. So if you're wanting to get a geology degree and for some reason want to be a haul truck driver like me, like those haul trucks nowadays are like playing a video game, you know? You're like sitting in a nice chair, like moving things back and forth. Like, how cool is that? We're seeing a lot of specialists come in, especially in mining. So things on like ESG and sustainability. If you are a specialist in an aspect of that, that's really important. I met a lady a couple weeks ago who is she's a geologist by background, and they're using microbes to mine copper. Super cool, but she's like a specialist in her industry. So really niching down can have a huge benefit for you as well. Sustainability coordinators, technology integration specialists, again, on that supply side. So lots of what I would consider kind of new age geology jobs coming up for sure. Lots of diverse options.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I love that you mentioned that. I've looked into a little bit bioremediation and biorecovery, like using microbes to remediate mined areas or recover metals because of their, incredible diverse metabolisms of like taking up metals these little bacteria have. But yeah, that just speaks to, again, the diversity. Someone like with my background in studying microbes and rocks and how they interact could go into this in a whole different way than traditional mining. That's so cool. I love that. Oh my gosh. Okay, so speaking of remediation, what are the current standards for cleanup after mining in an area after mining in an area is done?
Yeah, it depends. So no, for real, it really depends on federal and state regulations. So obviously here in the US, places like Canada, Australia, they have a little bit, I want to say, stricter regulations of mine remediation than other places in the world might. It is much stricter than historically. We talked a little bit about recognizing the past impacts and the importance of that. So obviously we learned a lot from those mistakes, and we continue to improve those remediation policies. A lot of times companies often have to get these bonding agreements before any mining can begin, and that's part of their permitting process. So we hear a lot in the news about like these different mine permits and stuff that you have to get, and all of that is done through this process. And that's part of the reason it takes mines so long, is because they're going through all these different studies and processes and all of that stuff. My particular favorites right now are quarry remediation. I've been doing a lot with that. I was just in San Antonio. Their Six Flags is built in an old quarry. How cool is that? My boyfriend and I are heading down next month to Kentucky, where there's an old limestone mine that you can kayak in. Golf courses, malls, all sorts of stuff. I think that's so cool. But that all comes from these different standards that are set in place by either the state or the federal government or your communities. So if the community is like looking at this quarry, it's a big hole in the ground. They're like, what are you going to do with that big hole in the ground? And the mining company's all, what do you want? And they're like, well, we'd love a golf course, or we'd love a lake with fish in it. And the quarry's like, cool, we'll do that. So lots of different opportunities. There's a book called 102 Things to Do with a Hole in the Ground. And it's literally over 100 examples of different mine reclamation that has been done around the world. So I highly recommend checking that out.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. I didn't know that. Okay, I'll link that book in the description for those of you that are interested, especially the person who asked that question. That's really cool. Okay, the next question is essentially, these mining these things we're mining, these resources are finite. So is there a time in which we could feasibly run out? Could mining come to an end because we run out of things to mine?
I mean, technically, yes, right? But that being said, I think there's still lots of opportunities. One thing about mining is that the more finite you get, the less of a material you have, the more expensive it is, which is more likely you can get it out. So like, I have a rock here. This is a rock. This is what we call pretty high grade. This is ore from the mine that I used to work at. And all of this, I gotta get through the whole like makeup thing with my hand here. So all of this fun, shiny stuff here is all of the mineralization. It's a whole bunch of different minerals. I'm not going to list them all. But so this is all the stuff that we're mining. And you can see that most of this rock is not that stuff. So the more expensive and the more finite a material has, a commodity has, the more likely we are to come and get this good stuff out. Now, that being said, there's lots of opportunities for stuff that was once previously called waste, or stuff that didn't get mined because it was too low of grade. There wasn't enough metal or of the commodity in the rock. But now there's lots of opportunity for that. So gold, for example, gold is like $3,000 an ounce right now. It's crazy. What's happening is we are seeing a lot of mining companies going in and reprocessing some of the rock from those historic mines to get that gold out. So previously it wouldn't have been mined. Now they're like, heck yeah, we're getting a lot of this metal out. And that's great. So will we run out of metals? Possibly. Way, way, way off in the future. I am hoping our recycling is going to be so much better by then that we won't have to worry about it. There is the possibility of things like space mining and mining asteroids. We're seeing that come up. There is the possibility, good or bad, I'm not going to get into it, of like deep sea mining. And again, we're not going to get into that. But the commodities are finite. I don't foresee us running out of them. Long answer to that very simple question.
No, I mean, it deserves a long, it is kind of a multi-dimensional, complex question and problem. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it's a kind of a thing in our foreseeable future, especially with our, like you said, I mean, we're going back to these things that we used to call waste because we didn't have the capability to get those things out before, but now we have all these new technologies. We're getting better at that. We can come back to these things and grab those. We can, recycle more and better, especially with new technologies. So I think we're moving in the right direction and extending that lifetime of mining material that we can get. But anyway, last question. What was the most rewarding aspect of your career in mining from a day-to-day basis? You've kind of already hit on this, but what was kind of most rewarding for you?
Yeah, and I have like a bunch of answers in my notes here, but what it really boils down to for me, and continues to boil down in my current role in the industry, is the people. Miners and people working in the mining industry are so unlike anyone else I've ever met. There's a lot of pride in the industry. The industry is small, which is so cool. You go to conferences around the world and you get to run into people you meet. There's so much learning from all of these other people, especially with the new technology coming in. So that, I think, is the most rewarding aspect of my career back then and currently is getting to interact with the people that I get to interact with on a daily basis.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and all this amazing insight for just general knowledge and entertainment, but also especially for students that might want to get into this. I think this is going to be an amazing resource to have out there.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I am so stoked about this series. I think it's going to be so cool to get to see everyone else who's doing cool stuff in their careers.